Have you ever wanted to make your life easier? Or felt like, what do I have to do to get it to be less complicated? Or maybe you've attempted to try to do some things, but every time you feel like you're getting a little closer, something happens to just kind of throw a wrench into it. And so all of us at some point have to deal with complicated situations, life moments, relationships, all kinds of things. And yet, this kind of gnawing, like, can I have an easy button? How can I make this a little easier? Is there a way to simplify? And so today we've got a passage out of Proverbs 16:20 through 21 that gives us a little bit of guidance of things to consider of what do we want to do? What are we willing to do to help make things less complicated, to simplify our lives? So beginning in verse 20, those with insight find prosperity. Those who trust the Lord are blessed. The skilled mind is called discerning, and pleasant speech enhances teaching. All right, so insight, let's think self-awareness. And self-awareness and how do we contribute sometimes to complicating things, and how sometimes we make it a little easier of being able to do that self-reflection of how are my actions, the way I approach, my perspective, how is it contributing to making life simple, and how is it hindering and making it far more complicated? And this kind of thought of going, wait a minute, I need to keep some insight at the forefront of every interaction that I have, of being able to understand what's going on. And that leads to, well, what do I do? When I figure out I've got some insight, what happens next? That whole thing of those who trust the Lord are blessed. Of where do we ground ourselves? Where do we anchor ourselves when things are getting complicated? How do we anchor ourselves in God who has blessed us? What are those blessings? Of love, of peace, of joy. God's blessing of saying, you know what? Whatever's going on, only God gets to have the last word. And that is a word of love and peace. That is a word of saying, yes, we are worthy. Yes, we will be loved no matter what. And so a grounding, a centering of ourselves in God. And then being discerning. Proverbs talks about being discerning, which is connected to the insight, right, of that self-awareness. But being discerning is being able to kind of understand what are the dynamics at the moment that are happening. What's going on? Where are people coming from? What's happening with the situation? Because sometimes we get so involved in it that we start to focus on the emotional about how we only feel about it instead of being able to discern what's really happening. Where are people coming from in these moments? And then it ends with the pleasant speech enhances teaching, of thinking about how are our words simplifying or complicating an issue. How's the way that we approach things? What are we conveying? How is it being received? Is it what we intended? Is it not? Of really digging into how do we have words that are helpful in situations as opposed to hindering? How do our words sometimes hinder what's happening or even make things far more complicated? So here, Proverbs is giving us some insight. If we're really looking to simplify, to get our lives to be a little less complicated, of really understanding ourselves and our words, our actions, and where we center ourselves to help us do just that. It's a little bit of work, but how do we get a little bit of insight? How are we discerning? How are we grounding ourselves in God? And what are the words that we are speaking that actually not only have us simplify our lives, get a little less complicated, but how is that working for others? Pray with me. Merciful God, so often life gets too complicated and we just want to break from it all. When we are feeling like life should be easier, give us insight into our own words and actions that make things more complicated. Help us to ground our whole selves in your loving presence. Give us a discerning mind that broadens our perspectives and brings wisdom to all situations. May our words bring about your peace and joy. Guide us in this way of living so that we may uncomplicate our lives and others in all the ways that we can. Amen.